Welcome to episode 9 of the Hail Married podcast. I'm A Toves, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. We're excited to be joined today by a special guest, JJ Perez from Inside Runner Sports, as we recap this crazy season of UTSA football. So welcome, JJ.
Yeah, welcome.
Thanks for having me, guys.
So the Roadrunners wrapped up their 10th season playing, and it was, by all accounts, a pretty successful season. We finished with a 7-5 record, matching the 2013 team for the second best record in the program history. We finished second in Conference USA West Division with a 5-2 record and earned our second trip to the bowl game, if you don't count the 2017 bowl invite. For a season that almost didn't happen, one that was certainly filled with a lot of adversity, the Roadrunners chose to make this a year of opportunity, and I think we can safely say they exceeded our preseason expectations. So let's take a look back at the season and kind of walk through it month by month to sort of get a idea of how the season went.
We start in September. We have no idea. We've got all sorts of things that have been happening. You know, will the season happen? Will it not happen? As we got closer, we realized, there's going to be games. How many were going to be played? We had no idea. We just figured it's probably going to be, we'll find out that week, if not, maybe even the night before, if that's going to happen. So I think one of the best things that impressed me about Trailer was early on before the Texas State game was we're not going to overwhelm the players. We're going to put in just a set number of plays. We've run out of plays. We run out of plays, but we want the players playing fast and free. And it just seemed like that, on top of some of the other things that he had discussed with the players in terms of, sort of the Black Lives Matter, some of this other thing where he was really being genuine with, showing how much he cared about the players. And I think these aren't his guys. These are guys he had to essentially win over. And he had talked about it before, give me a chance. And so it seemed like they did. They played fast and free to start out. I think it was just incredible in terms of the Texas State game. Any thoughts in terms of early in the season from either one of you?
So the Texas State game was just wild. I mean, let's just Texas State and UTSA. That's what moves the needle for Roadrunner fans. I mean, you could throw any other game out there, and it's like, hey, this is the one everybody's really focused on. And I mean, the way that game ended, the Rashad Wisdom pick six, the missed field goal, and the Roadrunners carrying the trophy off the field. I mean, that would have been like the highlight of any other season. Mm-hmm. But the fact that this wild 2020 season happened, I mean, to me, that's like one of the top 1 or 2 games of this season, that Texas State game, because of just the craziness of how it played out.
Yeah. I mean, when I first met Trailer at the National Signing Day event, and Barry Lenny, Ben was not real happy with me, but I said to him, look, all you got to do is beat Texas State. Like, that is your measuring stick for the fan base, So once they won that game, and like you said, in the kind of a crazy fashion, I felt like, all right, well, they checked the box. I told them all they had to do is win Texas State. So it's going to be a good season no matter what.
Did you have any thoughts about that offense when you first saw it, JJ?
I mean, it was hard because we didn't know what to expect from this offense. And I think as we go on through the season, I mean, they were still trying to figure out how they wanted to run this thing. I mean, right. There was no installs. You guys mentioned it in previous episodes. Everything was done by Zoom. I mean, they didn't even get to see these players until, camp started a few weeks before the season. So it was, I don't think nobody really knew what to expect. And I think we knew what kind of offense they wanted to run under Trailer and Lunny based on where they've been previously. But, honestly, for them to come out and put a 50 burger on Texas State to start the season, I mean, that was just something like, wow, this is going to be an amazing season offensively.
Yeah. And then, you go from that where you have this fast start from UTSA, all this energy, to the next week, the SFA game in the Alamo Dome, and it was like someone had just like sucked the life out of the team. I mean, that was a little
bit of a letdown, right?
It was such you were expecting. Yeah, low energy. Low energy in the dome, low energy from the team. It was just.
I mean, I think it was tough. Was that from the fan perspective? We were there at the game, and we had no clue like what was going to happen. Like, you had people coming around telling you to keep your mask on, and you could literally hear the players on the field talking. You never get to hear anything they're saying. I could hear Frank from from our seats, and we were like 5 rows up, and I could still hear him. And I was like, okay, well, this is odd. Like this is what they meant, or everybody meant, in terms of this season's going to be quite different, because with no fans, you can literally hear everything that's being barked out. So I thought maybe it might be an advantage for the defense, because they would kind of catch on to some of the things that were, that were being said. Like Frank tries to audible to something. If the defense is catching on, or even the coaches are able to catch on because they'll be able to hear a little better, they can start signaling the players, hey, they said Omaha or something. And I don't remember any of the calls right now, but they yell out a word and it's there. But it was bizarre, because again, there was no energy. There was nothing, the fans, everybody was all over the place. So it gave the birth to the pillow killers. And how did you feel about the pillow killers? Because to be honest, I didn't really care. There was some fans that were like just having like this kind of we don't really like that. But how did you feel, JJ? I mean,
when I first heard it, I was like, oh, this is kind of lame. And in full disclosure, when a lot of times when Jeff says some stuff that's kind of, oh, what's this? What's this triangle thing? You think, oh man, that's not gonna be a thing. But then the players, the kids, they buy into this stuff and it works. I mean, the difference from that first home game to the second home game was exponentially different because of those players on the sidelines. And I mean, that first game was weird, just how empty it was. There was no noise. They weren't playing any sound over the speakers, so they kind of adapted as we went. And to me, those two games, although the on the field play, the SFA game and the Middle Tennessee game, the on the field play was a little bit to be desired. They didn't play as well as they could have. Those two games gave this team kind of early momentum, I think, to help kind of propel them forward, because let's face it, sometimes you don't play your best and if you're still able to squeak one out, like I mean, that SFA game was a lot closer than that final score was. And then, they held off Middle Tennessee as well in that next game. So I think those are two critical games for the Roadrunners.
Yeah. And to me, that really demonstrated the difference between this team and last year's team, because I think last year's team would have dropped at least one of those games. They seemed like they would get into close battles and they just couldn't pull it out. And this team, just the fact that they could have that kind of gritty sort of comeback, again, just told me that, okay, this team, is here to play. They want to prove something, and it's going to be different.
And it felt like I would say they grabbed more control of the games. And even though I would say, like, overall, they would grab control of the game, but they weren't able to. And I always go back to Isaiah Thomas. He would always say, in third quarter, you got to have that kill shot. You have to have that kill shot, that one big shot that really tips you over the top and, essentially brings the game to you. And it just never seemed like we could get that point, but we were also still playing fast. And I think that also, as much as we had that momentum going, I was kind of still a little concerned about how fast we were going, because the defense was still giving up yards and still they seem to be wilting still. But one thing we do have to talk about was that against Middle Tennessee, Frank goes down.
Yep.
So he's had previous injury issues. Even on the podcast, I've been a little critical of him. I thought this was going to be, his issues were going to be mainly just injury issues. And so I wasn't sure, but we all love the backup quarterback. And we thought, here comes Adkins. Adkins kind of struts in, and it felt like here comes the gunslinger. And he was coming in at the very end of the half and against Middle Tennessee. And you see that first pass he threw, it was right down the seam to Dingle and gets him in field goal position immediately. And it was opposed to, and I mentioned it to Andrew during this whole time, and it was, hey, this is like the first time that a backup quarterback hasn't come in and immediately thrown an interception, because it seems like every single time backup quarterback comes in, throws an interception. Yeah. So that pass told me this was different. This team was either coached different, built different, but something was a little different about this team. And to see Josh essentially handle that, kind of come in, handle that, it gave me some hope for at least we're not going to lose too much. There's the offense may look a little different, but we're not going to lose too much.
So this coaching staff went out and got Josh Atkins as a graduate transfer. And that's not a shot at any of the other quarterbacks on the roster, but you just have to kind of know how coaches think, because, you know, when it comes down to it, it's the quarterback play in college football is such a huge factor.
Right.
And the fact that this roster was loaded already with a lot of quarterbacks, and they had, you know, the recruits committed and they were going to sign, for them to go out and get another quarterback, I mean, that says a lot about what they think about Josh Atkins. And those 2.5 quarters against Middle Tennessee, I'm telling you, to this day, to the bowl game, even they really liked what they saw out of Josh Atkins against Middle Tennessee. And if he ends up playing any more significant time as a Roadrunner, it's because of that performance. I mean, they threw him into the fire and he delivered.
Yep, absolutely.
And I thought it was interesting, and, you know, maybe you'll be able to expand a little bit on this, but I think they had said something about he had mirrored Frank in practice, and he had kind of mirrored sort of the snaps as well. I just felt that kind of kept him prepared, and I kind of wondered, are the other quarterbacks doing that, or is it just a Josh thing? Like, is that just unique to him?
Yeah, it's sometimes you have to read between the lines when they're answering these kind of questions. And I think Jeff said this on one of the media Zooms or something, and they asked how many first team reps did Josh take that week. He didn't take any, none, because that's how they structure the practice. They're like all in with whoever is going to be the starter. Yeah. And, you know, that's something that kind of was an issue down the road with Lowell, and, you know, JoJo didn't get any reps. And so for him to mention that was key, because, you know, he thought he was going to be, you know, in the position to contribute this year. So those mental reps are huge, because, I mean, a lot of times you got guys on the scout team or running the second or third team, and, you know, those reps just aren't the same with the first team. So no, to answer your question, I don't think anybody else does that. I think that's something really specific with Josh.
So then we go into kind of that tough stretch of October, which we all knew was going to be a tough stretch going in. I mean, you've got BYU, you've got Army, you've got UAB, you know, La Tech, FAU, all these teams that we have struggled against, or, you know, and BYU is a ranked team. We've never played them.
But I think there was hope, because we had, again, you love the backup quarterback, right? So Atkins is at the helm, because, you know, Frank can't go, or they kind of kept him back against, you know, they were just keep him back against UAB. So there's that hope. And then I guess typical UTSA, especially from a fan point of view, it was just ripped away right away, first play. And I still remember that, because I saw him get sacked and kind of thrown to the ground. And I told Andrew right away, he's hurt, because I saw him moving his shoulder and it didn't look right. He was grimacing, and the announcers were just out of it. They thought, they weren't sure what was going on. So I wasn't listening to her, and I was adamant. I was like, he's hurt. Who's coming up next? Is it JoJo? Is it Lowell? What's happening? They went to the next, because they were going to snap it again, but then Traylor came in and called the timeout. Clearly, I mean, obviously, seeing what was going on, he's getting bashed for that timeout. But I'm like, they're going to bring in somebody else. They have to. Like, he hurt himself, and I'm afraid it's a collarbone. Well, of course, they don't say anything about it, but they bring in JoJo, and I could see it. And maybe you might be able to expand a little bit on this, but it felt like you had Atkins, so the next kind of type of model is JoJo. It wouldn't be Lowell. It wasn't like that game plan was kind of fit for Lowell to come in right away. So it felt like, let's bring in JoJo, see what he can do, and let's see what we can make from this, because now we're gonna have to change a lot of things after one play, like just one play, and we're already kind of throwing it out. So any thoughts there, JJ?
Yeah, that was actually the week I was referring to, where they were all in with Josh Atkins taking all the first team reps, because they knew Frank wasn't going to be out, and Frank was going to be out, and that they needed, you know, to have Josh ready. And, you know, I don't like to call out specific players, but, you know, this is a good time to maybe mention the offensive line play at this point of the season wasn't great from a pass blocking standpoint, which is, strange because they were so good all season with the run blocking. But, that first play of the game, the tackle just missed. He just let the linebacker free or the end free, and that was it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the end of Josh's season for the most part. So, coming into the game, JoJo was number 3. He was number 3 mostly for most of the season, and they had this low zone package for Lowell. So, they you kind of want to satisfy all the quarterbacks, all the 4 quarterbacks, because they all practice, they all kind of deserve a little bit of playing time every once in a while. So, but he got cheated this week because they were all in on Josh. So it came back to bite him. I mean, he got no reps. He was not ready whatsoever, and I think he got sacked 3 times in his first possession in the game, and it was nuts. And he even stood in there and took some big shots. And he's a big guy with a big strong arm, but it wasn't enough that day. So they turned to Lowell, and man, Lowell was super good that day.
Yeah, and it was surprising because he'd been inconsistent last season. There were moments where Lowell was great last season, and then there were just so many moments where he just was off. Its accuracy just wasn't great with passing. And so to see him come in and to pass and be accurate was like, where was this Lowell last year? I mean, it was really great to see him, come in and be successful, because I think, there was that kind of sort of gasp when they made the switch, like, what's going to happen, in the fandom anyways.
Yeah, true. And I mean, I thought they played as best they could against UAB. I think UAB was just a better team. Maybe it's different. You catch them later in the season, but at the time, you previously already mentioned it. Like, they're still trying to figure out this offense. They're still trying to figure out, what they're doing. And, I think the advantage that UAB has is that they've had their coach. They know exactly who they are, what they want to do. So, I think it was just a tough road. And so we fall there, and then we're going into BYU, and now is the big question of who's going to be quarterback, because Josh is out, and you and a few others have reported collarbone. So now we're in this position of, okay, do we throw? We want to protect Frank because he's this. We know has a fragility, but at some point, he's going to have to last the season and take some of those hits, and so. I remember we got into a discussion. I think Greg Luca had tweeted out, hey, they're kind of going back and forth. I just chimed in and said, I think you start Lowell. I think that's who you go to. And so it was surprising that we get to Provo and it's Frank that comes out. He's the one taking the snaps. And it looked like clearly he had been, he wasn't right. It didn't seem like he was nowhere close to being 100%. And, I don't know. I mean, I think you can write a bunch of narratives for each one of these games, but it feels like at some point you change one thing, it doesn't mean that it changes the entire outcome. It means other things will probably still happen, So I don't know. What are your thoughts there, JJ?
Well, let me ask you guys this. Do you think if they go with Lowell earlier in this game, do they come out with a win?
I don't know if they come out with a win. I still think at the end of the day, BYU was a better team. And because they're a ranked better team, they would find a way to win.
I didn't think so. I think, maybe it makes the game a little closer. Maybe we lose by a field goal or something, but it felt no matter what that they were going to figure out how to slow the passing game, because that's really what I think was what elevated to me the offense. Like, we weren't getting anything on the ground. Like, if we really go back and look at the stats, Sincere had a quiet day, and which is weird to say. Like, Sincere having a quiet day is seems unheard of, but he only got, I think, like 11 carries. He only got 60 yards. So he was still up there in terms of yards per carry, but he was quiet. And it just seemed like Lowell just got on a hot streak, and he was just hitting the receivers at the right spot at the right time. Everything was there. And it seemed like there was just a lot of guys playing really well. And so he was able to take advantage of that. But it's all I could think it was 10th year. I don't expect this UTSA team to be knocking off high ranked teams. I expect them to be playing like they kind of did in terms of staying with BYU, but not upsetting them just yet.
Yeah, I thought at the time that maybe the offense was more geared towards Lowell's style of play, kind of the short, maybe first read, second read type of passes, and his arm strength on those outside passes, or he may have the strongest arm in terms of that pass on the route tree. But at the same time, they're in this conundrum where the offensive line was struggling with pass blocking, and if Frank Harris gets out of the pocket, that's as dynamic of a weapon as anything else you have in your arsenal. So I think it was Lowell's time at that point in the season, and I would have loved to see what he could have done against Army, had he not suffered his injury.
Yep.
Absolutely. And I mean, again, hats off to Lowell being able to come in, essentially the relief pitcher coming in and, essentially keeping the runners just in the game. I mean, it was at that point that we started the podcast, and I was, again, a little rough on Frank, but I really felt like Lowell just really surprised me again, and I think that was sort of the theme of these first few weeks of October is, okay, we've talked about the 4 quarterbacks and we've kind of seen all of them perform at this point already. Do we really have maybe a diamond in the rough / something a little special set up with Lowell, because he's been sort of the quiet man, sort of the fourth man out. So is this going to lead us to something? So that kind of leads us now to Army. And, I get that, fans look at Army and they think this isn't much of a team. I mean, I think on our podcast, we said something like you're looking at like these 5'6", 150-pound guys and you're like, oh, we can take these guys easily. But there's a discipline to them that they have that's unparalleled by any college team. They're big on discipline because they're going to be defending our country. So to them, this is what they need to be able to do. This is how they need to be able to go about their day and know what's there. And so I felt like UTSA wasn't there yet. We'd seen it the previous year, kind of hung around, but we weren't able to make that big play to really swing it in our favor. We had a fumble at that time, and that caused everything to snowball. This game, it just felt like we were there. We were, I won't say that we were 2 or 3 plays away, but it just felt like we were at least had a puncher's chance in this one. And I thought Lowell kind of regressed a little. I thought he was a little happier in the feet. Nothing like we had seen against UAB and I would say BYU at the time. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it was just so disappointing to see Lowell go down with that injury because, one of the things I think of personally when I think of Lowell is like he's a sturdy kid. I mean, I know he's had injuries, with his knee in the past, but, especially like last year when you look at him coming in for Frank, it's like, okay, here's Lowell. He's this like really sturdy kid. He can take those hits. And then when he went down, it was like, oh, man, like, where do we go from here? But, fortunately, Frank was, healthy enough to come back.
I'll remember that game, unfortunately, for what Army did on the ground. I mean, they just kind of ran it down UTSA's throat. And that was one of the disappointing things I think that maybe the staff felt as well, because this was supposed to, and it ended up being a really good, defensive line for this Roadrunner team, but playing kind of an undersized offensive line. I mean, those guys dominated the Roadrunners that day. And then on Lowell's injury, I guess it was so gruesome to see like how it was. And, I was shown like an X-ray of his foot and leg. And it's amazing that he's, hopefully going to come back by the spring and, compete for this job again, because I mean, he really laid it on the line. That was I think a red zone possession. He was going for the end. He was going for it all, and he laid it on the line. So that's kind of one of the things. He's a tough guy. He hasn't always been the most accurate here in his career, but he's laid it on the line for UTSA. So I could appreciate that for sure.
I was just kind of stunned because I thought that maybe it was like maybe like he had broken like his lower leg, but then as he got carted off, and there was more kind of reports afterwards, and it was similar to the Dak injury. I was like, wow, it didn't seem like it at the time, but looking back, we had recorded the game and I watched again, and I was like, huh, like it just still, I was stunned at just him still. He didn't seem to flinch as bad as again, credit to his toughness, I guess you can say, but he didn't flinch much in terms of here. I would have been crying like a kid, like a little kid. I would have been like, oh my God, it's detached. I don't know what's going on. I would have been like freaking out. I think there would have been much more going on if it's me replacing Lowell. So I get the whole gruesomeness, and again, hope that he comes back, and because that just, it was really unfortunate. Again, he was on a good run, and who knows what happens, if he continues to take some more snaps and develops again. So it was a tough loss with Army, but I felt like, again, at the time, it was just sort of a loss by 1,000 cuts. Here, Army's going to just do their thing, and that's how they're going to beat you. So I think now we get to La Tech, and this was a weird game for me because we have Frank coming back, but now I think from at least my viewpoint was, do you really put him in position to have some runs out in the field? Like, do you give him some quarterback runs? Because you already know that you're down quite a bit of quarterbacks, because I think this is when JoJo goes like the undisclosed, like, oh yeah, he's not going to be with us. But I think we all knew what was going on, and we understand why it can't be said, but we knew that it had to be some sort of COVID protocol that was going on. He wasn't going to be able to play. And that was really sort of concerning, because now you're looking down the bench and going, okay, we had 4 quarterbacks. Now we've got Frank, and then guys that haven't seen the field besides maybe being Pillikillas. I mean, that's really what it came down to. And I think a lot of UTSA fandom was beginning to have those Uncle Rico moments and put out those videos of saying, I'll warm up, coach, because I think I can go in there and maybe make some throws. But it was a bizarre game. It felt like you have a team that has been bitter. There's been some bitter games. There's obviously been some tough moments against La Tech. They've had UTSA's number forever. Like, there hasn't, there's been a win before here, before this game, but it just felt like you play La Tech and it's a loss. And I don't know why. Like, I get that La Tech's good. But it just seems like we could never knock off La Tech. And then we get to this point, here we are, second half. And I felt like this is where I felt like, and it was happening beforehand, but the offense at this point has really begun to slow down. It's no longer going as fast as it was. I think because of injuries and because of everything going on, there seemed to be more of we're going to go a little slower pace and, get a better read of what's going on. You guys have any thoughts about the La Tech game?
This was the game I think they trailed by 13 in the second half, and they rallied back. And I mean, to me, this was the turning point of the season. This is where, I mean, this game could have gone either way. La Tech did end up being very good this year, and this kind of pushed UTSA to their winning season. And I think there was a moment late in the game where Frank rolled to the right. It was like 3rd and medium, and he stretched out and kind of dove for the first down. And to me, I'm getting this monkey off your back. This Louisiana Tech. I mean, I think they're one of UTSA's rivals. I know a lot of people don't like to say that, but I mean, they were just dominated UTSA Independent. They've done it in like running up the score, like scoring touchdowns with 5 seconds left on the clock. And, the former players, there's not a lot of love lost between this group. And, they're always good too. That's the other thing. Yeah. They're always good in this conference. So, being able to kind of get that win and be in contention for Conference USA at this point of the season, it was just so huge for this team.
Yeah. And, I think there was a moment where, wasn't it Sincere who said to Coach Traylor at like halftime, like, I got you, coach. And like, he, really kind of, in a lot of ways, along with Frank, but, he kind of led the comeback, because he really tried to kind of take the team on himself. Like, I got this. I'm going to run. I'm going to do this. We're going to win. And I think it was, like you said, a mental turning point, where they proved to themselves that they could win. They'd had these close games. They'd played these tough competitors. And this was the time where they really kind of came through and said, we can do it.
Yeah, I mean, I too felt like here we have a chance to at least stay with someone. And can we put it away? And this team really needed it. I think, we go back and look at the season up to this point. We played essentially two wide spectrums. We've had some teams that aren't very good, and the UTSA runners were able to put them away. And then you have these teams that are good, and they just struggled, and we're usually about a touchdown, maybe a little bit more behind them. So this team La Tech kind of fell in the middle, even though they weren't as good this year, but it felt like they fell in the middle of these two spectrums that the teams we had played. And so, if we can't pull this out, then to me, it felt like, to what you said, JJ, this may start kind of snowballing down. So it's like there was hope after this game. We get that win, and now we're going into FAU and going to Florida, and I already felt like the team seemed a little tired. And obviously you're essentially now 8 straight games you're going to play. I was waiting to see, and I thought it was coming against La Tech that they just didn't have the energy. And it wasn't because they weren't trying to have the energy. It just felt like they were just running out. Their gas tank was just low. And so going to FAU, I had a little concerns, but I thought, well, you got Sincere, you got some chances to maybe stay in this game, but I still didn't think that UTSA could pull it off. I think it's tough to go, for young teams to continue to kind of win on the road. That's sort of like you play some good teams and win on the road. And that's sort of like, now we're getting to where we need to be. And I didn't feel like the team was there yet. And it just felt like they just never got off the plane. It just felt like, and I know it's going to sound terrible to say, but it just felt like they just couldn't, like, either whether it was the gas tank was completely empty and we had just kind of missed the fact that they just didn't have it. And I don't know, the team just did not play well whatsoever.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the consensus among the fans, is that if you look at this whole schedule and, the ebb and flow of the season, it's just like, UTSA laid an egg that day against FAU in Florida. And, I'll agree to that to an extent. I think the score was a little closer, or the game was closer than the score was. But I mean, there were several factors. FAU hadn't played that much up until that point of the season, and I think they got 10 guys back from COVID that week, and I think that really helped them, including their quarterback, by the way. And they were really good. They were really good offensively that day, and we weren't. I think that was the start of like the Roadrunners' poor tackling games that they said, some kind of stretch where it was just. It overall was just a bad day for UTSA. And I think you're right. I think after the Louisiana Tech game, Coach Traylor had said, he was worried about his guys being mentally and physically exhausted. And I think we saw some of that against FAU. And I even take it to, a further extent that I think having the week off the next week against Rice really helped, and that was an unplanned week, but I think it was huge for this team down the stretch.
Yeah, definitely, because kind of after this game, it's like we've been on this roller coaster, right? We're all excited because we went 3-0 in September, and then we go through this stretch where everyone's like, can we pull it off? You're kind of down. Then you've got the like excitement of La Tech, and then FAU drops back, and so you're kind of like in this like roller coaster. And I remember saying after we did the podcast at FAU, I'm like, we've got this stretch of games coming up that are winnable. Like Southern Miss was not playing well, North Texas was not playing well, UTEP were, we've had our moments back and forth, but we're a better team than UTEP. Rice was still really an unknown at that point because they hadn't played hardly at all.
Yeah.
But I knew if we could just hang in there, like November would be okay.
And I was kind of worried actually about Rice, because even though you don't consider them a rival, or at least I would say most fans don't consider a rival, because you don't really have Rice fans that can kind of have that battle between, back and forth with UTSA fans. But if you look at scores of all the games, these are rival type games because they're always close. It doesn't matter except for I think the very first one when we were really just outmanned at the time. I think it was second or third year program, and you're talking about Rice has been around forever. I just really felt like this game could be tough, but it was still winnable. But then the FAU thing happened. I was like, well, this is going to be a little difficult to pull off because we're really struggling. Like it's
We needed some rest.
I have an unpopular opinion about this Rice game that we didn't play. I think the Roadrunners might have lost that game because of where they were at in that point of the season. And I mean, you look at the history of UTSA playing UTEP, Rice, and North Texas. UTSA's never beaten all three of them in one season. And I think that's been that way for a reason. So maybe UTSA dodged a little bullet there with the scheduling gods. And, you know, if they did that, I think they earned it based on, you know, getting through the COVID protocols up to this point of the season. So, hey, it's 2020. You just take it.
Right. And I think just to kind of cap off this Rice talk is just that it's their mantra of intellectual brutality. Like, you knew that they were going to be physical. So, you know, essentially a beat up team playing a physical team, you knew that this could get bad for UTSA. So, you know, probably did dodge a bullet. I'm with you, JJ. I was really thinking that this was probably going to end up being a loss because it was always close with Rice. And I think Rice was going to catch us at the right moment, essentially. And I think that's where a lot of teams throughout the year outside of UTSA, they caught some teams right at the right time when they were battling COVID protocols or injuries, and they were able to, you know, essentially knock them off. So we go into UTEP, and I think it was just when we got to the dome, and I looked on the sidelines, and I noticed I had seen your tweets and Greg's tweets, and I had noticed that you guys had said, "Oh, there's a lot of guys missing." Oh yeah.
Like, and my heart starts racing as I'm reading all of the names that, you know, Greg Luca's tweeting out. He's not here, and this person's not here, and this person's not here. I was like, oh man.
And of course, you start looking at others around UTSA Twitter just to make sure, because you're just hoping that Greg's wrong, right? Like Greg's not usually wrong, but you're just crossing your fingers that, you know what, Greg, maybe his glasses fell off or something else is going on. Like he doesn't see the numbers. Like maybe JJ's like playing with him or something. Like I don't know. But.
So it's crazy because just like going in, I had heard the numbers were going to be high, and I didn't get a specific number, and they don't tell you who's not there.
Right.
So me and Greg sit next to each other in the press box. So what we do is we both look through our binoculars and we check off the players one by one against the roster and just see who's not there. And you have different waves of guys coming to work out. They work out at their position group. They warm up. They do go through drills. And then they all get on the field together. And sometimes guys are there and sometimes guys are not. And I mean, it was just one of those things where I think that game they had like the GA and the offensive line coach running drills with the offensive line because there weren't enough offensive linemen that game. Yep. And I think even Jeff Traylor said after the game, if they would have had one more offensive lineman go down, they wouldn't have been able to play that game. So that was kind of the critical COVID moment of the season, I thought, and the bowl game, actually.
Right.
So that was just another wild twist to 2020, if you're asking me.
Oh, yeah. And then, you know, you kind of like mentally, I got set up for this. Oh, this is going to be, you know, it's going to be tough. Like kind of like what Traylor wrote, like it's not supposed to go well today, you know. And I just kept, every time, like, we're kind of keeping it close. I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be a close game. And then halftime happened, and it was like, oh, wow, like, we're really taking control of this game. And I just wasn't expecting that to happen. It's like.
And she was getting annoyed with me because I kept saying, nope, we're going to have that moment. So I think there's two critical points here, too, is that I think people started freaking out, too, because there was one name that I think you and Greg reported that was out that I think freaked everybody out, which was Sincere McCormick.
Right.
The leading rusher in the nation is not here. The offensive star is not there. So obviously things start racing. You start thinking of COVID, but then after a while, you're like, who's going to take his place? And me, I was confident the whole time. And I think the reason is I just didn't, you know, call me whatever you want, but I just don't believe in UTEP. I had seen them play several times through the year, and I felt like, yeah, they have their moments, but they kind of remind me of UTSA of years past, that they, you know, have had some talented guys, but they just don't have enough talent at all of the critical positions. So because of it, they're going to struggle. And even as the game started and that first half went, I was more concerned because, the defense was on their heels. And I was like, I don't understand
Right. Yeah.
what is Tynix doing?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember the timing of it, but I think it was during the game sometime where all of a sudden it drops that
It's like right around halftime.
Tynix isn't there. So now it's you're scratching your head, at least from the fan point of view. We're in the stands and we're saying no Sincere. And I was thinking we still put up 21 points. We're going to be okay. But no Tynix. And I was like, well, now it makes sense. We haven't been as aggressive on defense. We've been falling back on, in zone, and that's kept UTEP in the game. And that's what kind of changed at halftime was, you have a more aggressive defense. But I was really feeling good for Brendan Brady because he had been injured earlier in the season. And all of a sudden he finally gets sort of that starting role in the offense where he hasn't really had that opportunity. He kind of did near that very end of like the 2018 season. Had to kind of share it with Sincere 2019. And here's his one chance. When Sincere's out, it's all Brendan's to kind of show what he's got. And to me, Brendan's a very good player. I think, I've seen him play. I've seen his all-around abilities, and I really like his game. And I just felt like, as much as I'm saying this, I just hope he doesn't get hit in the wrong place, because if he goes down, now we're really in trouble where Frank is going to have to carry this whole thing. But we exploded that second half, and it felt like after all of the stuff that we've gone through with the last couple of weeks at FAU and Rice, now it felt like there's something a little special about this team that we had seen early on and now has really started to blossom now in these stretch of winnable games.
Yeah. And that's, of course, when we had, the story come out of Trailer kind of having them in the triangle of toughness before the game and talking about the backups. And I think, again, you'd mentioned this earlier, those were they seem like little minor things and some people might not buy into it, but the guys really seem to buy into, hey, okay, we've got Brendan Brady. Does anybody here believe that he can't be the running back, or they don't believe that he should be the starter? Well, of course the team buys in and supports that. And I think those little things really make a big difference, in their on-field performance. We may take that for granted, but I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, I think what I remember most about this game, and it was the game that Larry Coker came back for and he gave the team a pregame speech in the locker room. So during halftime, I went to go look for Larry because I've known him, for years, and I couldn't find him. And I ran into the president of the school and I said, "Hey, where's Larry Coker?" So he brought me to him and we sat there and chatted to the end of halftime. Meanwhile, my phone is blowing up with people from UTSA saying, "Hey, we have a statement to make. You're not in your seat. We're going to send it to your email." And that was when the whole Tynix thing kind of exploded. And it was like, oh man, what's going on? Is he fired? What's going to happen? So from, a logistics standpoint for me, I was kind of taken by surprise, much like everybody else was that day. But I think from a game, that was a 600-yard, offensive record performance. And, Brendan Brady kind of just filled in right where Sincere left off. And, it was a prelude of things to come with this offense, which was, I guess, to this point of the season, still hadn't shown itself to be, quite as dynamic as we all thought it would be. So I think this was kind of Barry Lunny Jr.'s, coming out party, to be honest with you, this UTEP game.
Yeah, for sure.
I agree. I just thought that they just played so inspired. Maybe it was, Larry Coker, whatever it was. It just felt right when that story did though come out about them talking about the triangle toughness and, kind of calling each player out. Just a quick question. Did they do that before every game or was it just really specifically for this game? Do you know?
No, they do it before every game. They go Friday, they do their walkthrough there, I think Friday night, or they check them into their hotel. They go through like some kind of walkthrough and they actually go through and, meet at the triangle, former triangle. The Roadrunner actually looks like a little triangle. So it's kind of weird the way that worked out, but I don't know what they talk about specifically all the time. I think there's different themes or whatever, but that that day it was about, overcoming adversity, and there sure was a lot headed into that UTEP game, and I don't think they thought they'd be able to win that game, let alone set the records they did.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's what's important in terms of when we talk about the culture of Jeff Traylor was just that, like, again, having people and bringing them forward and saying, do you believe in this person? And everybody saying yes. It seems silly, but even if you think about it as a regular job, you have maybe a moment like that where everybody's saying they believe in you, then I don't know if it's so much inspiring, but it builds that confidence that, all right, together we're going to get through this. And I think that again, all these moments are kind of adding up throughout the season of, here's where something could have fallen apart, but it didn't, because here's where we're at. And that kind of leads us then to Hattiesburg and Southern Miss, where I thought the team had control of the game, even though it didn't seem like it on the scoreboard. I just felt like Southern Miss was trying to throw as many punches as it could, but UTSA was kind of playing sort of that defensive game of just blocking every punch and going, yep, keep swinging away. We're going to come back with something to throw you off. And, again, Sincere McCormick to the rescue. Like he had another Sincere McCormick game. I've been calling him, by the way, my Tim Duncan, because it feels like he just shows up, puts up his numbers quietly. They're always like really good numbers. And then he just like goes home. And I obviously I don't know Sincere as well. I don't ever get to talk to him, but I just keep calling him that because, again, it's just like a quiet superstar, just goes about his business and there he goes. And I know we've heard stories about, something like the little practice tracker and stuff like that, but to me, he's something special. He's got that special, and you see it when he has the ball in his hands. And in this game, he ripped off, I believe it was a 60-ish yard run, touchdown run or something like that. It was a long touchdown run. And, I just remember Frank handing the ball off, and I think he jumped in the air and started celebrating even before I think Sincere had gotten to the line, because the hole was there. And I think Sincere was just like about to just turn on the jets and just take it all the way home. So any thoughts or, themes from Southern Miss?
I think what I remembered most about this game, and really about Sincere this whole season, is the durability he's had throughout this season. I think he rushed it 30 something times in this game, and it was the 173 yard single game record. I mean, he was just a workhorse. I mean, and this was a close game. This was a surprisingly close game that I think UTSA may have lost, if not, for Sincere McCormick and the way his style of play. And I mean, just very physical running, finishing off the runs, and really just a dynamic performance that, we ended up, I think, maybe taking for granted a little this season.
Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, again, he's a special guy. And I think, again, if not for a couple of like defensive missed tackles, and I hate to bring that up again, but it was that kind of swing play that they had, Southern Miss had, that kind of brought them back. I think it was UTSA was all over it. There was numbers everywhere, but then they missed those tackles, and it was a backbreaker. But I felt like, well, let's see what this team is made of, because if they can make some more stops or make a couple first downs, then this game's over. And I felt like they had, at the very least, had that experience and knew that this is how they need to close out a game. And Frank, unfortunately, didn't have it passing wise. So I think that's what I think made the Sincere performance even better, I think, because he was essentially had like a stacked line. And so he was having to have all sorts of defenders there. So that kind of brings us then to North Texas and the rivalry game of many. But to your point, this team hasn't ever won against Rice, UTEP, and North Texas. And North Texas always seems like it's a close game. 2018, where I felt like the Roadrunners just weren't very good, kept it close to the Dome, when I didn't feel like it should have been close. And then last year we were there, we saw Frank go down essentially in the second play, and then everything just fell apart from there. And it just felt like that was the season right there. Season was over at that point. You could tell from a lot of players. I thought that they were stunned, and it was just done. So it felt like everybody kept talking, and it seemed like there were people wanted had been pointing at this game, and they wanted to get some revenge here. And so, I mean, I just remember them coming out, and I said, yeah, these guys, these guys have it. They're going to be relentless here. They're going to go after this, and they're going to go after this big. What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think it was probably one of our better starts, since Texas State. I mean, honestly, we'd really been a second half team after that very first game. And so I was encouraged by the way that they started the game, and I knew that North Texas defense wasn't very good from the games that we'd watched. So I was optimistic. I didn't think it was going to end up, with the points the way it was. I mean, I didn't think that we were going to win by that much, but I was feeling pretty good about it going in.
Yeah, I was real happy with the way Frank Harris played. Happy for Frank Harris the way he played, because I think he was 19 for 20 something, real sharp this game. I think I remember the reason why I was thinking this game was starting so fast for UTSA, because they were so efficient passing the ball.
Yes.
And at this point of the season, everybody was stacking the box against Sincere. So it worked out really well for the offense. And I did not think we were going to see a blowout in this game. And, we saw 2s and 3s playing at the end of this game. So it was a nice turnaround from last year, where they pretty much laid the smack down on UTSA. So UTSA got a little revenge on that and ended the season on a really high note.
Yep.
Absolutely. I mean, I thought as soon as I saw it, I was like, all right, so definitely clinch that sort of bowl, whether it happens or not. They've ended on such a high note, and it was again a November to remember. Yes. But it was again what we had thought, at least the two of us had thought, was 4 winnable games potentially. But once Rice came along, we were like, well, maybe 3 winnable games. But as long as we saw these 3 games, it just felt like, all right, this team has understood where it stands in terms of the college world. There's the have-nots. And it seems like UTSA is right in the middle there, that they're on the verge of potentially starting to take some of these, I would say, games where they have lost to some of these more average teams and really start competing against the really good teams. And that, I think, 10 years down the road of a new program, I think is where you should be. You should be at this point where you're starting to turn the corner, getting that depth, getting everything kind of going, putting yourself in a position to start kind of being a more consistent winner. So we go into
it was a great season. It was an absolutely great regular season. And then we get to the December to remember, right? I mean, how crazy was that, guys?
I know. I mean, I loved what Trailer said. He was like, hey, my daughter told me, I'm the first coach to make 2 bowl invites in a season and not get to coach at either one of them. 2020, right? It's right there.
Yeah. I mean, we had the story last week where I said, it was a Frisco Bowl and we bought tickets but they never downloaded them. So I was like, something's got to be up. Something is happening. And there were times, I'll be honest, where I wanted to text you and go, all right, JJ, what's going on? Like, you may have to know something. And it was clear that nobody knew anything, but it was still like, something's got to be up, because it was like a couple of days later and we still didn't have the tickets. And then we get the news of SMU, and then it becomes, are they going to go to a bowl game?
I will tell you exactly how I found out about the SMU having COVID and, the Frisco Bowl being canceled. A friend has a nephew on SMU who told them, hey, we have an outbreak and there's no way we could play. And that's how I started. That's how I found out. And then from there, that's not enough to report it. Obviously, the way things work for us is you kind of have to either get someone, high up the food chain to tell you off the record, and, then it's good to go. But at that point, it was like all these bowls, all these teams started, opting out. And it's like, holy moly, is there going to be anybody for UTSA to play? And the DMs were quite filled.
Yeah.
If you would have sent me one, trust me, you would have not been the only one. And you'd be surprised. There are other media people, asking me, what are you hearing and this and that. And I said, well, I report what I know. I I can't give you anything more than what I know. So it was just a wild time, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I really felt like at one moment, like we were going to get left on the shelf. It was going to be 2017 all over again. But it really would have been a shame if that happened to this team because, we just worked so hard to get to this point, and just would have really been a heartbreaker. But
yeah, I mean, managing 2020, essentially that's what this team did, whether, however everybody felt about it. I mean, the fact that it took them until November to really have to really deal with COVID issues. I think I said it a couple of times in the podcast, like, I remember myself at that age and I don't know that I would have handled everything correctly. So the fact that they were disciplined enough to do this and, be able to keep themselves in position to play the games was just completely admirable. And, you have to give them a huge, I know it sounds dorky, way to go, because they had a goal and they really, having only one game canceled was just amazing. So, finding out about this whole bowl game, the first responder bowl against Louisiana, I just thought it was a cherry on top. At that point, I was like, I know Louisiana's really good. Hopefully we keep it competitive. And, I think just things went that way. I felt good again for Frank in terms of, it seemed like he might be replaced. I felt like, I think everybody has talked about this, like right after halftime, it seemed like he was going to get replaced because of that bad fumble. I think there was a lot of people saying bring in Atkins. And I thought maybe it is a right time to bring in Atkins because at this point, I don't know what you had to lose. Little did I know that Jeff Traylor was FaceTiming or on video,
right.
But I'm not sure if he was saying anything, but it just felt like this is, is there going to be a switch? And is this going to, is this what we're going to remember Frank's season by instead of it the way we do now?
I actually, so in the press box at SMU, it's next to the coach's booth. And so I ran by to use the restroom at one point during the game and there's a little window. And I said, is that like a FaceTime they had? I didn't even think about it at the moment, which was weird because I thought there was no way he could be plugged in live, I guess, in a logistics standpoint. And I guess it was more, maybe, I don't know how much input he had. Maybe we'll learn more from this if we get to interview him again. But, I thought there were definitely some aspects of the game where they missed him being there. I think there was a play where they called a timeout where there would look like there's some confusion on fourth down and they ended up kicking the field goal and the field goal was missed. I think that was second quarter or something. I think that might have happened different. And then obviously those three plays, you had a first and goal at the 7 in the fourth quarter. I don't know if he would have had an influence there, but just, they were down 20 players, 5 staffers in that game. This game would have had not have happened if it was, a regular season game. Just they weren't all COVID guys. Some guys were injured. There were some great issues, I was told, but just to have, your coach pulled off the field, 3 days before the game. They lost their strength coach. They lost another position coach the day before the game. And it's just like the mental aspect, the toll of that. And for them to come out and play the way they did, it was like a goosebump moment. I remember telling Greg Luca, like, look at these fans here. Like, this is the loudest I've heard this group of fans all season long. And UTSA really should have won that game against Louisiana. They really should have won that game. So, that was kind of, like you said, a cherry on the top of a really fantastic season.
Yeah,
absolutely. Because just to give some outlooks or what happened with this offense, like the offense ends up with 415 yards per game for the year, second all time in school history behind 2013. They scored 28 per game. That's third all time behind 2012 and 2016. It seemed like it improved throughout the year. Obviously, we talked about the November to remember, but it seemed like they were peaking at that time. And even against Louisiana, against a top 20 team, essentially, they were able to move the ball and move it effectively, even though they were kind of a little one-dimensional at times where they had to just run it. Because I felt like the wind did play a role in that game. They did have some issues, and because Louisiana had the same issues, I think, trying to throw into the wind at times. And I think on a couple of those pass interference calls, at least the one with Tariq, which was, I think, the second pass interference, you could see the ball kind of hang up there, and it felt like that's not a ball that hangs up there if there's no wind. I was impressed by how the team went and how really overall, we kind of talked about it too, is the tempo went from really fast to all of a sudden really slowing down. And it felt more like they were playing more chess at the end instead of just kind of trying to play the checkers at the beginning, just trying to move things around. It seemed like at the very end, to me, and maybe I'm wrong, but it seemed like a better reflection of what the team or the offense kind of begins to look like for next season and years on however long Lunny's here, and, Trailer, of course. But it just feels like they were slowing it down a little bit more and taking more time to see, let's get into that right play and let's call the right thing and let's get Sincere the ball. Let's get Zakari the ball here, whatever. So any thoughts about this offense?
Well, the thing that I thought Lenny did really well was, a lot of times you see new coaching staff come in and they try to insert like what they want to do. It's like, look, this is my style of offense. This is what I'm going to do. And it seemed like while they have a vision for what they ultimately want UTSA to be, they were really trying to play to the strengths of what they had and build the offense around what they have. I mean, I think Louisiana is ideally probably what they want to be long term. But given that Frank has challenges with, accuracy and long passes at times, they went a little bit more run heavy than they probably would ideally. And so I just, I thought that one of the good things they did, though, was, really to try to figure out what works, take that, build off of it, rather than just come in and say, this is what we're going to do. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, we'll recruit to it next year,
Yeah, I thought, to be brutally honest with you guys, I thought sometimes Barry Lundy got a little cute with his play calling. I think there's a handful of play calls that, we saw early in the season that have gotten thrown in the trash can at the end of the season. I mean, that reverse to Dingle they tried to make happen, those Julon Williams things that never happened. And I think he adapted more towards, let's face it, it's quarterback play. I mean, Frank being there at the end of the season, he hadn't played this deep into a season in 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
Right.
And for him to be available and for him to have gone through, I think the 8th or 9th game, Lunny told us that they had just given Frank the ability to check off, like to change plays.
Yeah.
And that's a huge part of any offense.
Wow.
And to think that they hadn't been together long enough for them to be able to trust him to do that kind of says, what this offense was this season. I mean, they were just trying to get by, and they did a pretty darn good job, and if you keep it that perspective.
Yeah.
Absolutely. With that, the defense, it allowed an average of about 383 yards per game. It's actually, if you look at it in terms of historical Coker and Wilson era, it's about the same. So I get that, you make comparisons, whatever, but still, I think in terms of not having the other teams had training camps, the other teams had practices, the other times had reps. These guys didn't. These guys, sure, some of the same guys from 2019, but there was definitely a difference, I think, in terms of, I don't know, maybe it was for me, it was just the aggressiveness. And I think you saw it in terms of, you saw that this team allowed 25 points per game, almost 26, and it ranks 3rd all time in history behind 2011, which is the inaugural year where we kind of played just all Division II, kind of FCS teams. And 2017, which I think is 2017 is the all-time best defense. It had Josiah, had Marcus, it had, plenty of players throughout, but this defense, I think they struggled early because of the tempo of the offense, but I think as the year went on, as much as there was some trepidation, I think, from fans at certain position groups, I really felt like this defense really played well. The secondary in particular, I thought the cornerbacks were going to be toast. After the, Texas State game, I thought this is a tough passing team, but how does it look like the rest of the year? I mean, if we run into COVID protocols? We run into injuries. What happens? And yet they kind of muddled through, and they just, I don't know, Mayfield, I felt like he became sort of it was hard to throw against him. Ken Robinson, he didn't even start the season, and he looked amazing at times. There were times where I felt like, wow, like I didn't know that we had him on the bench, like ready to come in and have maybe a shutdown corner, something that UTSA has never really had. And Tariq being the wide receiver, switching, he had his tough moments last year because, I think, he was kind of doing it at the very end of the year, but to come in and be so physical and to play as well as he did. And then some of the young guys, even behind these three, it just became encouraging to me to see that getting some pressure on, I would say, on the quarterbacks and the opposing quarterbacks. I think we're going to be in a good hands, especially with some of these cornerbacks and some of the secondary.
Yeah, as long as they work on tackling.
Yeah. I think this defense needs a nickname. Like, I think they were really good, and they gave up some yards. They didn't give up as much, a bend but don't break style of defense. And there's a lot of good players on this defense. And you look at that defensive line and those two linebackers in the middle. I didn't think that those two units were going to be that good this season, and they ended up being pretty darn good. So there's more talent at linebacker coming in. And I think it's going to be an even better unit next year. And I think a lot of it, you have to give credit to the change in scheme. I think the scheme fits the personnel a little bit more better than what it did last season. And, who knows? Those numbers are good numbers that you mentioned, but I can certainly see them getting better next year.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. And I think that it just kind of leads us into sort of just overall how the team played. Just the what were you, both of yours, like, if you gave grades, what were
well, I was gonna say, JJ, I know you gave him a B+ the last time we talked, so
B- actually. Or no, I'm sorry, B+.
It was B+.
I got chastised by a few people because it should have been an A- in their book. So I just, there was a few things I nitpicked. I don't know if there was a huge signature win. We played the Roadrunners played a lot of good teams close. I think, you beat an Army or a UAB or BYU, it's a completely different season. It's one of the best ever. The best ever, probably. Right. And it's not even close. So there were good things and there were bad things. I really liked the play of the offense down the stretch, but the defense, too many missed tackles, and that was like the whole thing of the season. And even, in the bowl game, the offense played okay. They moved the ball, but they didn't score touchdowns. You got to score more touchdowns.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I was thinking in my evaluation. B+ is pretty good.
Right.
Yeah, no, I'm with you because okay, so we heard your grade when you told Greg about it, and Greg like immediately chastised you. It's like, I was shouting because we watched it on the TV as we put YouTube on there, and I was like, Greg, calm down, Greg. Like, this is I'm with him. Like, I was like, come on, just take his glasses.
I was with Greg. Okay, I'll just put it that way. I was on Greg's side.
So there was a battle even between us on the grade, but I too was thinking a high B+. There was a lot of great things, like you said, how they handled the season just overall. Trailer, obviously looks like the right guy at the right place. Coordinators seem like the right guys. I would say it was the highest B+ you could give it, like maybe an 89.9. I'm right there. I just think that there is that, like you said, that lack of signature win. Like, if we had been able to pull off like an Army, even an FAU, if we had gone to FAU and won there, and even if it was close, whatever, you pull off that win, and I think you send not only a message to the conference, but I think you send it to the fans saying, this team overall, we're different and we're turning the corner into this next decade, and it's a really bright future.
Yeah, and I guess my argument for it being more of an A- would be, I would say all of those arguments are good for most years, but given the fact that it's 2020, given the fact that you have COVID, and all of these other uncertainties that you have to add into it, just that little extra element of being able to manage through and handle that, like, that's kind of the thing that pushes it into the next
That's
level.
fair.
And these are all the same. And for the most part, they're all the same guys that were here last year, so really coaching, and just how they handled things made the difference. It's not like they added in this huge level of talent that, came out of nowhere. I mean, we did this. We went from 4 wins to 7 wins with pretty close to the same guys.
And those 4 wins last year weren't very pretty.
No.
I mean, it was a hard 4-win season last year. So if you look at terms of, incremental improvement from year to year, I mean, this one's off the chart. It's like 100, A plus. And just so you guys know, the president of the school, Taylor Amy, also sent me a message chastising me about my B plus. So he's with the A minus group. So there you go.
I was just about to ask you. Yeah, we're just about to ask you. Like, we heard you had detractors. Who was the one that was really chastising you? And good to know. But overall, successful, I think, season.
Yeah. So going back to the beginning of the season, I know you didn't have like a projection kind of going in, but if you, can think back, where did you think this team was going to end up in terms of their record?
I thought 6-6 was fair based on the schedule. I think maybe the Roadrunners might have picked up one game in their favor with the COVID scheduling, rescheduling, whatnot. But I mean, they were to y'all's point, they were in games nobody gave them a shot at. When you're a double-digit underdog in college football, it's a blowout. I mean, it's not even close. So for them to be able to exceed that, and probably they should have exceeded it by another game or so, is really, really impressive. You can't say enough good about the job that Traylor and his staff have done in just such a short time. They could have come in here and not won the number of games they won, but still that they've put in this culture, this triangle of toughness, the single digit numbers, all the things that, we hear over and over in these press conferences that becomes redundant. But after a while, you realize it's not, coach talk, or it's not, just something to tell the media so they leave you alone. It's what they're actually doing every day. So, stacking good days on top of good days over there. I guess that's the key.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think the best thing about the triangle of toughness, like you hear in other programs to talk about culture, but the fact that he made it tangible, I think that's the thing that, you picture the triangle, you talk about all 3 phases, and, those things just kind of make it something that you can okay, I can visualize it. I can, try to understand what I'm striving for. And I think that's kind of the thing that makes it a little bit different than just saying, hey, we're trying to be tough, or I think it just kind of makes it a little bit different for them.
I like that there's a big triangle, then there's 3 little triangles inside. So you have all these different aspects, the culture pillars, if you will.
Right.
So yeah. I love the triangle talk. Big fan.
So with that, let's go back to, so we started the podcast essentially around BYU. So we didn't have any sort of previews or anything. But one thing we wanted to add in terms of, when we're doing the season in review was what we got right and what we got wrong. So let's start with what we got wrong first.
Always going with the negative, huh?
Well, I want to end more positive. So I want to get what we got right later and kind of brag about that a little bit.
All right.
So in terms of what we got wrong, I mean, you kind of gave a 6-6 record in terms of what you thought. I thought it would be more of a losing record, and it wouldn't necessarily reflect the play on the field. It would just be that because of the challenges that this team had. And really, all you really have to go on is just what you've seen in the past from teams. It's not like you have this new data and you can say, oh, I saw them run this drill, and this is what's going to change the season for the runners, right? So I felt like because they didn't get that chance to really have that time with Jeff, with Barry, with Tynix, it felt like all these coaches coming in, there was just way too much adversity for the Roadrunners to go through. I think the other thing that we both had was we didn't think we'd be able to play 12 games, plus or a bowl game. I mean, that's, obviously we thought there's no way we will, and we did. We got through it. We only had one canceled game, and even then, it kind of feels like maybe we could have played that game, but again, like we've talked about, it wouldn't have been the best interest of the players to do so. So, What do you got, JJ? What are some things you got wrong?
Well, I didn't think we were going to have a season at all. I mean, it looked so bad. And even when the season was starting to kick off, I was like, there was no way we're going to get through an entire schedule. And there was one point where it was kind of sketchy where there was a bunch of cancellations and stuff happening. I was like, this is it. The season's over. But to UTSA's credit, they did what they had to do. And like you said, I couldn't go through all that testing and be in my apartment and be on lockdown like the players were. So I get it. It's a big deal.
Yep. And I think they earned all the kudos that they get for that, because they really did a great job of maneuvering through that. Anything else you got that was wrong?
I mean, just again, I didn't know how they were going to handle it. I thought they were really going to likely only win 4 games. So I was really off and very surprised by the end result.
I mean, she's a big Iowa State fan, so she's always about like just more of the negative, like even last
being an Iowa State fan is hard. It has prepared me for these years as a UTSA fan.
Kind of like me with my Cowboys.
Yes, exactly.
She had a meme, by the way, that she was like liking in terms of, or a tweet where they were like, yeah, any team up 14 points, it's like they're like kind of propping themselves up. But like if you're an Iowa State fan, it's like kind of chattering, yeah. So I mean, it was again, a lot of things we probably got wrong just in terms of the season. All right, in terms of what we got right, you want to take this one?
Yeah,
brag a little.
I feel like there wasn't a whole lot that I got right this season, but after having talked to Traylor and Lenny for that short period of time at National Signing Day, I could tell that they were different coaches and they had a different vision. And even though they didn't really know a lot at that time, they seemed like they knew they had a plan, or at least thoughts for what they wanted to do with the team. And so, I think we saw that come to fruition.
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing was we got a chance to talk to Traylor about it. And we told him, he's just a big Iowa State fan. We mentioned Matt Campbell, and he had nothing but really good things to say about Matt. And it just seemed like that's sort of the type of coach that, Jeff Traylor is, sort of in that Matt Campbell mode. And I've said before, as I've watched Iowa State play and some of the things that they do and how they talk about culture and those fits, it's kind of like when we hear your interviews, JJ, when we hear all of this talk and you said, it's not just coach talk. This is real. It really is about all of this. So I mean, I think in terms of us really seeing that Traylor did have a vision and that blueprint, I think, we were right about that. And we feel pretty good about the fact that we think that Traylor is the right guy. I think there's just something different. And just to wrap up our part of this before we ask you, JJ, our take on Traylor is more of, we don't believe like he's looking to jump to the next job. I mean, at least our perception of it, but to make an imprint here at UTSA, to be able to really say, yeah, I stayed for 5 years and I was able to get these guys, have them turn the corner, and look at how I developed these players. Like that seems to be like the biggest thumbs up / congratulations to Jeff Traylor, as opposed to how many wins he had or how many bowl games. Like that all seems secondary if it's not to developing these players.
So what I got wrong was I thought Jeff Traylor was going to lay an egg with his defensive coordinator hire. Not so much when they hired Ty Nix, because if you guys remember, he was the last coach that was hired to the staff. And that's kind of weird in that usually your coordinator is really hands-on and picking the rest of your staff, especially under that, coordinator umbrella. So, he wasn't the first pick. I don't know who the first pick was. I don't even think he was the second or third pick. So they went down the road. I remember, National Signing Day last December, Traylor saying something like, he'll get here when he gets here. So, something funny like that. And I was like, oh boy, there's no defensive coordinator. Like, what's going to happen in my mind? So they kind of lucked into being able to get Ty Nix because of the coaching change there and the timing of everything of it. So I think that was where I was wrong. But you guys are right with Jeff Traylor. I think he's here for the long haul, but that doesn't really mean like a real long tenure in college football. That's like 4 or 5 years. And, he's building something here. He's building the culture. And I think, I think he's a really good recruiter. This recruiting class is going to be one of the best, if not the best. And if there's anything we could take away from the Frank Wilson years, are those recruiting classes. I mean, you could look at the players that he recruited in his last few years, and that's kind of set up Jeff Traylor and this staff to do a lot of good things. And if that's one negative thing I could say about the Larry Coker era, is that when he left, the cupboard was sort of bare.
Yeah.
And there wasn't, any depth. And now for the first time ever, this team has, legitimate depth along a position like the offensive line, where they could sustain guys getting injured and being able to move things around. So that's a testament to the recruiting. And I think, Jeff Traylor knows that. Frank Wilson knew that. And, as long as Jeff Traylor keeps bringing in these, highly rated recruits, that UTSA is going to be in a good, strong position, for the foreseeable future, if you ask me.
So, kind of going into 2021, from those recruits, who are the one or two that you're really excited about that you think is going to make an impact next year?
Oh, I think it starts at the graduate transfers, the kid from Texas A&M. I think the Kansas State transfer, I was a Ron Triplett.
Mm-hmm.
They're gonna hold on to a few guys because the transfer portal is crazy right now. And I was told, I don't know how accurate this is, but I think they're gonna actually try and get another quarterback just to have someone else in the room, an experienced quarterback, because we've seen it all. I've seen it all with the quarterback position. I tell people the way Dalton Sturm became UTSA starting quarterback is the craziest story of all time. There was a transfer quarterback who quit before the second game of the season or before the season. And Russell Bellamy, and then Austin Robinson quit during the season. And if none of those two things happen, we may never have heard of Dalton Sturm. So the way things work out, heck, even look this year, they were at times at quarterback number 4. So
which is why I think there's a quarterback curse. I'm just saying.
Stop it.
But yeah, I mean, lots of the linebacker, the JUCO linebacker they brought in. That's one area where they really need depth.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how many super seniors come back. That's going to impact a lot of things. If less come back, we'll see more guys come in, new guys.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised we haven't heard more about that. I mean, it seems like now that the bowl games are wrapped up, more and more schools, you're seeing, tweets and things come out about the seniors that are recommitting, but we really haven't heard anything from UTSA.
I think we don't know what's going to happen with Pro Day yet in terms of COVID restrictions and safety. A lot of times those pro days are where these undrafted free agents really get their opportunity to, show their stuff. And I mean, a lot of these guys don't have a lot of great film. Mm-hmm. And you look at like the UTSA's defense, they got snubbed a little with the all conference teams.
Yeah.
But that's because they didn't put up big individual numbers.
Right.
So the combine or the pro day is really their combine to showcase. Mm-hmm. So without knowing if you're going to get that opportunity, I mean, it's hard to say if you want to come back or not, really.
So with that, any big surprises, anything that you felt from this season?
Surprises. Wow. I think the biggest surprise is just how well Jeff Traylor has adapted to, this San Antonio 2-0 culture, trying to get the players locally. I think Frank Wilson did a good job of establishing that, getting his foot in the door. I mean, UTSA's always recruited these highly touted guys that go off to Oklahoma State or Texas A&M, but they never really got them. So for them to kind of have Sincere and Rashad and Frank, those three guys, I think they give UTSA street cred with the San Antonio recruits. But the fact that Jeff Traylor's kind of just doubled down on that, and it's like, hey, this is San Antonio's team. You could stay here. So I kind of get that's big, but I'm surprised that he's been able to have so much early success with it. I mean, he said he wants to have like 30 or 40 players on the roster next year from San Antonio. So that's, a little bit shocking and surprising to me that it's going to happen, but not that it should, because San Antonio is full of football talent.
Yeah, I think that's part of his plan too, to help us fill up the dome when we can fill the dome in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
So before we go, I think there are two things that are kind of, sitting on the table for next year that we need answers on. The first is, when are we going to get an answer on Ty Nix? When do we think we'll have resolution either way on that? Any insights?
So what I've been told is it's a Title IX investigation, and that there was some sort of hearing recently, and that apparently it went well for Ty Nix. We don't have a resolution. It's something that's going through the university, not athletics. So there's an extra layer of trying to, talk to the university communications office. But what I was told is that they hope to have it resolved this month, sometime in January. So we should be hearing something, from the university side on that pretty quick. I don't think it's a huge issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the thinking with the athletic side is that he'll be able to come back. But I kind of mentioned before, Ty Nix kind of fell into UTSA's lap. I mean, he's an SEC caliber coach. And if there's other, they call it the silly season in football, if there are other areas where his services could be available, I don't know that that may not be, an option that he may consider. So that's something definitely to keep an eye out. And then, of course, does he take any of UTSA's current staff with him? That's always something that happens this time of year.
Right. And then I think the other thing for me is, do we go into 2021 with a quarterback battle? I mean, we saw Frank Harris make it through the season this year, but, given how he played throughout the year and given, who we have now in the quarterback room and the potential to bring somebody in from next year, I think, we could have a pretty tough quarterback battle going into the start of next season.
So I know the listeners can't see me, but you guys can. Frank was this close to being replaced in the bowl game. And when he was replaced earlier in the season for Lowell, it wasn't so much because of his injury, more because of his play. So nobody's safe, I don't think. And I'd be surprised if we don't see some kind of movement in the quarterback room. But there's always something that could happen. You have two really young guys on the squad that, that were part of the scout team this season. And then you have a really super talented, recruit assignee that's going to actually come in January, Eddie Lee Marburger.
Oh, wow.
So, so you're going to have a full quarterback room in the spring. And again, like I heard, there may be another addition. So there could be, some movement to another position, or someone decides to hit the portal. But I think just like every other year, just like every other spring, we're going to be talking quarterbacks till we're blue in the face, I think. And I don't think we're going to be able to get past it. But, let's face it, I think Frank Harris is the leader in the clubhouse right now. And I think it's kind of his job to lose at this point.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. I mean, I think it's going to be interesting. There were moments when it seemed like Traylor was willing to move off of Frank this year, but, circumstances being what they were, I think Frank kept his job partially because, Adkins got hurt, Lowell got hurt. I think it's going to be a tough battle. Will give us something to fight about on Twitter for sure in the fall.
The spring is.
The spring, that's true. If we have a spring game, for sure.
That's when everybody looks amazing. And can you believe that we've got him at fifth, as a fifth spot in the quarterback room? I think it'll be interesting. So I do have one last question actually, I'll answer one too, but how about a too soon or too early prediction, like whatever it is for next year? Is it, do we have a new coordinator somewhere? Do we have, a new quarterback, a record that you think, are we going to the conference championship next year? But here's my, I guess, sort of Hail Mary, sort of too soon prediction. I think Zachary Franklin becomes our first 1,000-yard receiver next year, because I'm banking on the quarterback position being solidified and having at least one quarterback for the season. So I think that at least with his talent and I think the ability for them to spread the ball around, we haven't had a 1,000-yard receiver, and I think he's the guy to do it. And I think it comes next year, and I think it's the surprise. Either one of you guys have a surprise or just a too soon prediction for next year?
I would say I think next year, everyone's going to want us to be at like 8-4. I'm kind of where Greg Luca was. I think this might be a 6-6 team because I think COVID changed the landscape for the season. I think a lot of teams didn't handle it well when they didn't have their starters playing. They weren't effective with their 2s and their 3s, coming in. And so next year, assuming that everything's sort of back to normal, I think it's going to be a tougher landscape. These other teams that didn't handle that well are going to have their starters back. I think we might have some closer games, and it might be a little tougher road for us. So
that's yours.
That was exactly where I was going. I think UTSA is going to be a much better team in 2021 because they're going to be able to have spring practices, because their coaches are already seen the players and they know their tendencies and they could actually change things, whereas before they were on Zoom and they didn't know. So I think they're going to be better, but I also think some of the other teams, specifically in Conference USA West, are going to be better. Mm-hmm. And it was a down season for a lot of good teams, especially teams UTSA's accustomed to facing on really tough terms. So I think 6-6 is the threshold. I'm going to say they hit that mark, and I think they go, to bowl games for back-to-back seasons, which is significant for this program. I mean, it's like Jeff Traylor said, you come here and you could make history every time you hit the field. And I think that bowl win is kind of the one thing that's hanging out there. And obviously being able to compete for a conference title is huge too. But I mean, being able to have that team that wins the first bowl game is just, a landmark moment.
Anything, JJ, we didn't cover or ask you?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I'm the one who usually asks the questions. I'm not used to being able to answer these. So, I mean, no, I think it's been a historic season on a lot of avenues, on a lot of fronts. And I think, it's important that, the fans, I started listening to you guys mostly because I like to gauge, the reaction of the fans to some things. And I think Ben said it the most. It's just sometimes I'm a big West Wing guy too. And I think you mentioned something. It's just a program thing, the way the program sometimes disappoints the expectations. And I think to your point, the expectations next year are going to be through the roof. I mean, UTSA is going to have a target on their back every game, and everybody's going to be second guessing Jeff Traylor and Barry Lunny, and it's going to be like, why did you do this and that? So I think it's important to kind of enjoy the ride a little. I mean, we're the Roadrunners, after a few rough seasons, are back on the upswing of things, and just keep on following and stay out of the craziness that sometimes is Twitter.
All right. Well, I do have one question for you.
Yeah.
We watch these media interviews and, we can only see one side, right? We can't see the reactions. But, Jeff Traylor tries to kind of like joke around with you guys and, we can never see anyone's reaction. Everyone's on mute. So part of me sort of like picturing him joking around and like Greg Luca, like kind of like rolling his eyes in the background. But like, are you guys really laughing at him, or is he just out there on his own?
No. Next time we do it, I'll record the both sides. It's hilarious. He has us rolling like all the time, and it's like, it's all in good fun. He's like, Greg, how come you didn't ask me about this or something? And there was one media, like, I think after the Southern Miss game, Coach Traylor was yelling at me to ask a question, and it's all in good fun. I think it's a weird year for everybody, and we're just trying to make all the best of it.
So I've got one thing I have to tell you. Like, every single time we watch you after, the games, it's like you and Greg have like this mini podcast episode. Like, I got to tell you, you guys make a fun duo, because I just really imagine you guys like as an 80s like cop duo. And you talked about earlier about like having a name for the defense, but there's got to be something we can come up for the two of you, because it is fun to watch you guys, have that just immediate reactions. To have you guys do that, again, we watch all the time because it's fun, and I just want to make sure at some point to call that out, that you guys should be some sort of duo. And I'm sure that Bootleg is going to listen to this and probably create something crazy. Yep. So just be aware of that.
I'll be ready. Yeah, like the yin and the yang, right? We're actually like complete opposites, and he sits next to me to my left at the home games, and I'll just throw out like, "Oh, that was terrible," and it's like, "Why would you throw that pass or call that play?" And he's real analytical, and I'm more emotional, so we kind of bounce stuff off each other all the time. So yeah, I get it. He's a good personality. I try to have fun with it. I take my job real seriously. I don't think a lot of the reasons I do so much coverage and the things that I do is, even though UTSA still gets a lot of coverage, I don't think they get enough locally, regionally. So I try and do as much as I can and help everybody that covers UTSA, because I think we're all in this together. But yeah, we make a good team. It's a good little show. I get a lot of feedback, and I try to get Greg to come out of his cage a little bit. So definitely will the odd couple. I don't know. Somebody will come.
For sure. All right. Well, thank you for joining us on the Hail Mary podcast. We really enjoyed having you, JJ.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
A lot of fun. I'm
Appreciate
A-Toes.
And I'm the Toes.
All right. Well, we're going to be back soon with our long-awaited second part of our special episode, looking back at 10 years of UTSA football history.
What's up, guys?